All right, everyone, welcome. This is a Stage Managers Association webinar about what is stage management. It is part of our Year of the Stage Manager 2020 series of events working to celebrate and educate about stage management. A lot of people on the line happen to be stage managers, but this is also to be informative for those who aren't stage managers and who love stage managers and ultimately who want to try to help support stage managers. So we'll go back and forth between our jobs as stage managers, but also if you're not a stage manager, still stick around. This is also for you. Our moderator today will be Adrienne Wells. Adrienne, do you want to tell them what you would like to have them do?
Since I'm Adrienne Wells, I'll be your moderator today, just so folks can recognize my voice who are on the phone calls. I ask that if you are on a computer logging into this and you have a question, feel free to chat it to us. That's probably going to be the easiest way to make sure that your question can be inserted efficiently. If you are on a phone, when we have a moment between thoughts, I'll ask if there are any outstanding questions from the phone group of people, and you can feel free to let us know at that time. So trying to keep that even-handed as we can. I do ask that if you're not actively talking, that you do mute yourself so that we get as little extra noise as possible. On my end, if I can't directly see where the noise is coming from, I may mute the group, except for the person actively speaking in presentation. So just be aware if it seems like we're not responding to you, perhaps double check your mute. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Erin and Claudia, unless there are any outstanding questions.
Claudia, I think you should go ahead and take it away.
Okay, we were discussing the idea of what is stage management, and this is through the Stage Managers Association, but we're partnering with the Year of the Stage Manager to talk about different subjects every month. And the sort of January into February topic is what is stage management and how do you define that? And the first thing that Erin and I were discussing when we were thinking about how to approach this webinar is that it's kind of it's too broad of a question. It's kind of an unfair question because in what I like to call stage manager land, which is all of the different Facebook groups or social media groups or the Stage Managers Association, all of the places that these days that stage managers can talk to each other and discuss things and parse out what we all think of the different, what our job is, what the methods are, what the philosophy is, what the art is. I think that we have been discussing this topic, how do you define stage management, for years, and there's not one definition we can come up with. So do you go, the questions we asked is, do you go with do you talk about a broad definition of stage management and the essence of stage management? Do you talk about what the duties are? Do you define our job or what stage managing is by what we do? So there's not really a right or wrong answer to that. Erin, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, there used to be even a piece of paper that was sent out with the stage manager packets for equity called Definition of the Duties of a Stage Manager. And we don't even agree on those anymore, and we've taken them out. So yeah, a lot of stage managers don't want to be defined by any one thing we do, but Claudia has a good way to narrow down sort of the three main aspects of stage managers. I think that's your next slide.
Right. So, and the truth is that equity document that said definitions and duties of a stage manager, most of the document was actually spelling out what equity stage managers don't do, as opposed to actually spelling out what we do. But what I like to talk about, and I will preface this by saying I am a equity stage manager who spent most of my career in New York, and then I started teaching 5 years ago. So a lot of this discussion about, ooh, I get to talk about stage managing all day long, right? Which is the best thing ever. And I'm constantly trying to define it and trying to teach it, which is, so how do you have to have an understanding of how to present it in order to teach it. So this is what I use in my classes. And nope, I'm trying to think. Here it is. Sorry, still learning how to interact my PowerPoint with the Zoom. Here we go. So what I say is that everything you do as a stage manager, the whole SM team, everything everybody on the SM team does can be traced back to 3 fundamental jobs. The first fundamental job, and sorry, for the people on the phone, I just moved to a PowerPoint slide that says, lists out what I'm about to tell you. So number 1 of the 3 things that the job of a stage manager can be traced back to is to facilitate communication, right? That is pretty much across the board agreed upon about what is the job of the stage manager, what is stage management, what is the point of stage managers. Facilitating communication, I think everyone can agree with. The second thing is maintaining the artistic integrity of the show once the creative team, once the director, once the creative team leaves and the show is open. And the third is creating and maintaining an archive of the show, your prompt book or your production Bible. So one of the big questions I like to ask other stage managers is, can you think of anything we do that doesn't trace back to one of those 3 things? And I still haven't come up with it. In fact, one time when I was teaching, I swear I thought of a 4th thing, and then I lost it, and I have never been able to figure out what I meant. And maybe the reason I lost it is because I finally figured out it went back to one of those 3 things.
And we had discussed, is safety the job of a stage manager? Are we, and you had said that we're more communicating about the safety and then telling somebody else that it's not safe, possibly, rather than us specifically doing it.
Well, again, yeah, safety is about facilitating communication and maintaining the artistic integrity of the show. That is what, and even creating and maintaining an archive, meaning approaching the show, you're creating the archive of the list, like and communicating the information to equity about smoke and haze and any of the, you're communicating to equity about extraordinary risk and anything like that. But ultimately, from my point of view, I don't consider safety a job of the stage manager at all. So equity doesn't expect us to be the safety police. The producers certainly shouldn't be expecting us. It doesn't mean we don't look at safety issues and logistics, because that is definitely our skill set. But for instance, in New York, in the last couple of years, the reps have, equity has been started a new thing where they send the rep to do a stage walk of the set before tech starts. And they make sure they go through and they identify any safety issues. Sometimes if the stage manager is available, they will certainly have the stage manager go on that walk with them, but they're going on a walk with a representative of the producer, whether it's the general manager, and in a, probably it's still during load in, it might be the production manager, but they're not looking for the stage manager to be responsible for the safety. They're looking for the communication.
And I also wanted to point out that there's a definite about archival during, which is what you're talking about, like making your preset lists, making your run sheets, all that kind of stuff. There's a different thing about archiving the book to go on further beyond what you need for the show, especially if it's going for publication, and that we do have in most contracts a payment to be paid extra if there's any further work done for, quote, archival purposes. But when here Claudia's talking, she's talking about the normal things we do, the preset lists, the run sheets, that kind of stuff.
I have a question from the board.
Yes.
Sure.
This is regarding safety. Who is responsible for safety in rehearsal? I have another follow-up question once that's complete.
So again, I think it's about who's ultimately responsible for safety: the producers, the employer, right? So in rehearsal, is there usually a representative of the employer in rehearsal all day long? No, right? But if a stage manager sees a safety issue, our job is to communicate that issue to the right person, and two, ultimately the employer, for them to deal with it, not for us to deal with the safety issue, right?
I also feel like, yes, the stage managers can be in charge of safety, but why are we the only ones looking at safety? Everybody should be trying to be as safe as possible.
Well, that's what I mean, is that
Yeah.
in a rehearsal room, that doesn't mean a director can't see an unsafe situation and then go to the producer, go to the employer and say, hey, there's something to be dealt with. It doesn't mean actors can't see something and say it. So it's not actually, I don't consider that it's the job of the stage manager. I consider it that it falls into our skill set, that we are paying attention. We're aware, we're involved in most conversations and in the loop of how things are interacting, and we are writing down any notes and concerns, and we are usually the ones communicating. But being the ones to communicate something and be the ones responsible for something are two entirely different things.
And then hopefully you've also, if there's a fight, you've got a fight captain and a fight choreographer, so they're in charge of the safety for that section, and then telling others, including the crew, how to ultimately maintain the swords, all that kind of safety, which the stage manager should fairly much be aware of it and making sure the communication is happening, but it's not necessarily our job either.
And goes back to maintaining the artistic integrity of the show. That's where we come into play in that yes, once the like if there's a fight, once it is set, we are working with the fight captain or the dance captain or and working with the actors to maintain the artistic integrity, which would also maintain the safety. And if an unsafe situation develops, we would be the ones to be communicating to the creative team and the producers if they're offsite, and then coming to a decision about how to integrate keeping it safe while also maintaining the artistic integrity.
And what was the follow-up question, Adrian?
It continues to go down the safety rabbit hole, and I can put it to a back burner, but it does also touch on how do we utilize things like our skills at communication and our maintenance of the show in non-union environments in a way that keeps the responsibility where it should be. For example, on the producer versus having something come back to the stage manager. So in a circus environment, in a corporate environment, in a non-equity theatrical environment, you know, there's a lot of different worlds in which we work. Are there different ways to communicate and best utilize our skills for the overall integrity of the show, in this case, for safety across the board?
Erin, what do you think about that? Because I will admit that I have always had equity to go to. Like
Right.
if there was a situation where obviously first you go to the producer, but I think to me the question might be going towards, what do you do if the employer or producer doesn't address the safety issue? And
Right.
in my experience, I've always had equity to go to. But when you're working on an opera or you're working on a circ, when you don't have that in a non-union situation, what do you think, Erin?
The first thing that comes to mind is if there's an accident, because that's when we often really deal with safety first. And so what is the safety protocol for the building that you're in or the organization that you're in? Like one of my recent shows was a hotel, so they had a whole different ways that they handled incidents versus when I'm on a college campus. Then you've got public safety often to go to. So learning what is your first round of defense, because ultimately we probably will be the ones to communicate that there's a safety issue. So who do you call? Do you call 911? Do you call, and that's for the like immediate crises kind of thing, but there's often like, do they have their own workers' comp form that they fill out? And is there a workers' comp person that they go to? Or are you just doing plain old 911? Does 911 actually work in the building? Because it's, you know, do you have to hit 9 first? All those kind of things. That's where I first go to. And then, yeah, sometimes it ultimately feels like it depends on the stage manager because nobody else has thought of it. We do have the wherewithal that we're often the ones who think of it first, but we shouldn't be the only ones. Company managers will often, regardless what the area is, to me, we are dealing with the show and they are dealing with the people, whether it's the housing, the travel, and then also if anybody's sick, so working in tandem with your company manager, if hopefully there is one of those. And often if it's a true company management position, they've also already found out some of those information.
To me, this whole issue goes back to the idea of responsibility without authority.
Mm-hmm.
The stage managers are stage managers are labor, not management, right? We may have manager in our title, but we're not actually management. We are labor. And so we don't have the authority to say this is what needs to happen, right, necessarily.
Some people may not be clear that actually as part of being if it is a union stage manager, that's actually part of our thing, is that it's one of the reasons words like discipline and some of those have been started to be taken out of the equity contracts, because if you're in charge of discipline, if you are a manager, you can't actually be a union member. So while we have it in our title, we're trying to make it so our job duties aren't actually about management. And that's where part of the confusion lies for a lot of people in our industry.
And so there are worlds entertainment worlds where stage managers are actually more managers, and they deal with budgets, they deal with payroll, they deal with hiring and firing. But in the equity world, and then from my understanding, and is even in the opera world and in the non-union theater world, the stage manager still is not necessarily a representative of the employer. The stage manager is still somebody who is managing the show, but is an employee. So that goes back to the idea of, if you look at it from an equity stage manager point of view, the collective bargaining agreements, the rules, the guidelines that you have to follow in order to do a show under equity rules, depending on the agreement, that agreement is between the producer and equity. It's not between the equity and the stage manager, or the producer and the stage manager. So again, we are the people who are communicating how many hours of rehearsal you could have, and how many when you have to stop and take a break, and when you have to stop and take a meal break, and when you how you can schedule fittings and things outside of rehearsal hours, and when you go into overtime. That is all communication on our end, but we don't actually have the authority to be determining that. We are communicating the need for it, and then communicating whether we can actually do it or not. And so to me, safety falls into that same idea, that it is not the responsibility of the stage managers. It is, but we help communicate to make sure that the person responsible, which would be the employer, can have the right information.
And I think kind of jumping off of this, and I looked ahead, it actually kind of ties into your next slide. We just finished being at KCACTF Region 4, just came home yesterday, as a matter of fact. And one of the big things we were talking to the students there about is to take the words authority, boss, in charge, those kind of words out, and instead be a leader. We are leading people, but we are not the ones in charge. It's still the producer. We're trying to lead the room to one way, even a servant leader, some people call it. And Claudia, do you want to switch to your next slide, and maybe we talk about those?
I can. Oh, the definitions of a stage manager. And so this is actually what I like to do, is I spell out now from my point of view, and from my experience as an equity stage manager. Here is the different members of the stage manager team and what they are ultimately looking for. And so, or ultimately where their focus is. So the way I put it is that the stage manager leads the team, sometimes called the PSM, or the production stage manager. And your job is partly the overall tone and leadership of the show. You're maintaining the show for the creative team. You're maintaining the show for the producers. The funny thing is that when Erin was saying about you're being a leader, I totally believe that. But if you ask anyone other than stage managers,
Right.
who's the leader of the show, I would bet that they're going to say the director. Right. So it's a balancing act, because you have to be a leader, and a true leader is often somebody who leads and puts everybody ahead of them, instead of a leader thinking like, I'm the one leading the charge and I'm going to go and everybody's going to follow me. I like to think of the stage manager as a leader, is the person who is gathering everyone and sending them in the right direction, but like staying in the back and making sure nobody's like straggling behind, and like is the last one out, and is a leader in that way. That you're the leader because you're telling everybody, go that direction. I will be the last person out and be following up with you.
Yep. Go ahead and continue with your slide, I think.
In an American tradition, which is a tradition, not a rule, that the stage manager, the lead stage manager, the PSM, often is the one who's teching the call of the show, teching the show from the house with the creative team, begins calling the show, whether you then switch off with the ASMs or not, and is the one who is running the rehearsals and the performances, running the rehearsals in partnership and on behalf of the director, running the performances on behalf of the creative team and the producers when no one is in the room. And then moving on to assistant stage managers. This is a whole story. Does anybody, should we talk about stage managers first before we go on to the whole assistant stage manager? Or is there any questions before we keep moving on?
We have a couple more safety type questions that I've asked if it's okay from the person presenting them to put them to the side. I think we should continue in this vein a little deeper, and if we have time, we can reevaluate or perhaps even tie into a secondary point here.
Yeah, the whole safety thing could be a whole day on itself, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're going through the team, and I like to emphasize that stage management is a team sport. It's not a singular thing. It is. I don't see that you can effectively have a stage manager if they are the only stage manager in the room. The job is too big for one person. There are many different aspects and different parts of it. And so when we're talking in a traditional theater setting and we're talking in an equity setting, ASMs in every contract is something that is definitely a conversation that we are having, because it is the job of stage managing is necessarily so big that it necessitates multiple people.
And I have a feeling this is why people don't want to settle on any one definition for stage manager, because if we say this is a stage manager does call the show and does line notes and does this, and if you just cannot do all of those things, are you a bad stage manager? Or is it because you didn't have time for that, or that wasn't the priority, you didn't have time for it because there weren't enough people on your staff, whether it's equity ASMs or non-equity ASMs, PAs, interns, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of what we're about to talk about really could be done by any one member of the team, and we're giving some general of who might fall to do some, which things might fall to the quote, the assistant stage manager, the ASM, that kind of stuff. But it could be that day the stage manager does it, and ASMs certainly have called shows too. So they're all a bit flexible as long as you're talking about the whole team.
Well, and that's why I like to call it traditions. In the tradition, this is usually the person who deals with this and the focus of this and the team, because there is no one way of doing it. And in fact, the first thing that a stage management team should do is sit together and decide of all of the things that are happening that the stage management team will need to focus on, accomplish, or at least communicate or question. Then the team should sit down and figure out who's going to do what and what is the most effective breakdown for that show and that team, rather than there being any sort of rules of defines who does what. but there is American traditions. And again, there are other traditions around the country. And I often, just recently did a thing where I, in a student situation, I decided to borrow from a British style to have a PSM or a lead stage manager, and then have a DSM or deputy stage manager that checked and called the show. So there's different ways of doing it. But in this sort of American, US American equity tradition, the thing that is one of the more consistent topics among us, stage manager land, I like to call it. One of the consistent topics in stage manager land is that an assistant stage manager is not an assistant quite like other assistants. And it's, for the most part, especially on a Broadway tradition, you reserve the title assistant for someone who is assisting the person who has the job, and it's more personal specifically to them in that job. And that assistant doesn't have a function directly to the producer or to the show. So an assistant director does not have a function in the show other than assisting the director. Where an associate director might still be working with the director, but might have a specific function on the show and a relationship with the producers. An assistant designer doesn't have a function on a show. That is, they are assisting the designer, as opposed to an associate designer that has a more, might be expected to have more of a actual relationship and function to the show and to the producer. So one of the things that we are constantly discussing is what is a more appropriate name for assistant stage managers, right? And we started to do that a little because we went from we went from stage manager, first assistant stage manager, second assistant stage manager, to what's more prevalent these days is PSM, production stage manager, to stage manager, to ASM, or assistant stage manager. So that first assistant stage manager will be billed as stage manager, and the PSM billed as the PSM. So
some in their personal talking are starting to call it still ASM, but associate stage manager.
Well, so one of the things that have been tossed around, one of the ideas is associate stage manager, which especially in a Broadway tradition would be more, match more of the idea of associate director and associate designers. However, I've also heard of taking a nod to sound in that they have A1, A2, and just say stage manager 1, stage manager 2, stage manager 3. Or, first stage manager, second stage manager, third stage manager, that kind of thing. That makes more sense, right? Actually, the number goes first when you're talking about stage managers. I don't know why, it just scans better. So anyway, that's a whole topic and a discussion and a constant discussion about, is there a better name? Is there a more appropriate name for an assistant stage manager?
Right.
So in the tradition that we're talking about, most of the time, an ASM is the one who tracks and manages backstage. They are the ones who are working directly with the cast to create the onstage and backstage traffic and flow, and manages the details. They're dealing with the lights and the sound and the costumes and the props and the scenic, and they're consulting with all the departments, and they're creating and managing a plan to make the show happen on the deck, usually. Now, even when you go back to stage managers or whoever the calling or whoever the stage manager who is teching the call is, they are more likely to be more directly involved with the designers, the director, the creative team, and at least in a tech situation, will be in the house with the creative team. And the ASMs are the one who are actually on the deck creating and managing a plan. So that, and then even if the calling stage manager either moves to a booth or moves to a backstage calling position, that they are not necessarily the ones who are dealing with how the show flows how people get on and off stage, and what the traffic and what the choreography backstage is in order to create the world on stage.
And then if you're talking an opera background, the ASMs are even more involved. We don't need to get into a ton of opera stuff right now, but they are actually cueing the entrances. They are working directly, usually, and even in the theater world, often one will focus on props more and one on costumes more, even though you generally tend to know all of one side of the stage and then the other person's on the other side of the stage. But often one person will concentrate more on the props and one on the costumes. But in the opera world, they're creating even more detailed paperwork, working even more closely with all of the dressers and all that kind of stuff, because the tech period is so crunched in opera, and as well as the rehearsal process, which is why the cueing is happening, because there isn't time to just have the actors learn, they're not actors, they're singers, to just learn to, once you get the masking in, the black fabric that's hanging on the side of the stage, it changes every entrance, whether you're in theater, whether you're in opera, they forget about that extra 3 feet that it takes to get to the stage. Well, in opera, we don't have time to tech that. We just say, hey, move their entrance back 2 measures. They walk the same pace. They get out there just on time, and it's a way to shorten the whole process. That's your sort of bullet idea of why ASMing is different for an opera. I can go into it a lot more later, but ASMs are even more cueing lots of things backstage in an opera.
Yeah. Wondering if, looking ahead, so I break it down when you're facilitating communication. There's an idea of the verbal communication you do, as well as the written communication, as well as the, we all know the nonverbal communication, and we try very hard not to be saying the wrong thing with nonverbal communication. And then maintaining the artistic integrity, I like to talk about what does that mean, right? And so ultimately for me, I don't know if, nope, sorry, I was trying to deal with stuff and learn how to, Claudia should learn how to use PowerPoint and Zoom at the same time. Can you see my my cursor?
Yep. Yes, we can.
So what I was trying to do is highlight this. For me, the main job of a stage manager in terms of facilitating communication and maintaining artistic integrity and creating an archive is that when you're in the rehearsal room, your job is to make the world as real as possible for the actors, for the director, for the creative team in the room. That ultimately your goal as a stage manager is that when everybody transfers into the tech process, into the theater, that everyone in the room can say, oh yeah, this is familiar, I know where I am, as opposed to, I didn't know that was going to be there. I didn't know there was going to be a wall there. I didn't know that it was going to be like this. This is different, and now I have to adapt, and all the work that I did in the rehearsal room doesn't feel right, and I need time to adapt. I think your job and your goal as a stage manager and as a stage management team is to try to communicate and make it as real as possible in the rehearsal room in order for that transition to be more seamless for the creative team and for the actors, for the performers.
Yeah, do you want to, we talked about maybe talking about some of those examples. I have a rehearsal cardigan that I always have, because as stage managers, everybody else is moving around. We're colder than the rest of the people, at least I am. I'm pretty cold-blooded. So I always have a rehearsal cardigan. But the minute they say, oh, you're gonna take your jacket off and put it on the couch, well, my rehearsal cardigan comes off the back of my chair or off of me, and it goes up onto the rehearsal hall, even if it's not the right thing. But if we can start tracking that right now, we don't know when they're gonna get back to that scene again. Or one of my favorite examples is we started doing choreography for a finale of a show. There were 5 women on stage, and she said they all had purses. I didn't even know if they'd talked in their costume fittings yet about purses or not, but I grabbed 5 rolls of spike tape, and it seemed really silly, but I handed out 5 rolls of spike tape to the 5 women and said, okay, here's a purse. And it was so telling what they did, because some of them took the roll and put their hand through it and held it like it was a handle hanging down. Some of them grabbed the whole thing like a clutch and put it under their arm. Somebody whatever, there was like a third version of what they did, but we also started immediately choreographing, and that immediately changed how they did their choreography. And if I hadn't had anything in their hands, then we would have had to spend another whole day trying to figure out the choreography. And so then I was also able as a stage manager to say, you know, this, I don't know how much you have discussed the purses with each person, but in rehearsal, so-and-so was acting like she was carrying a clutch, so-and-so was a hanging purse, you know, all those little things. And ultimately, when they got on stage, I saw the clutch purse, I saw the whatever, and it gave them something to work with at the time.
I will, I think if you put any group of stage managers in a room for any amount of time, ultimately, if you're talking about stage managing, one of the conversations that will come up is what kind of rehearsal props have you made? What are you most proud of in terms of rehearsal props? And because it's not that stage managers should be responsible for providing rehearsal props, it's that your job is to make it real and to keep the work going. And so if in the moment yes, you might go back and request, can we have some rehearsal props? Can we have some rehearsal purses in the room? But in that moment, they're about to choreograph it. Don't have the work stop. Grab something. And so we have all made amazing things out of what's sitting around the hospitality area or spike tape or things like that. And it makes such a difference, I found, in terms of, again, how you're interacting with your collaborators, like with the performers, that I once was in a situation in a rehearsal room where I saw an actor, and they had to sit on stage, and they had to go down stage, and one time they would go down stage and they would be the father character, and then they'd go back and sit on their chair, and then the next time they would go down stage and now they're Prince Charming. And they would go back and forth, and I saw that the actor was going like this each time. And so
for those of you on the phone, she's miming putting something on her head.
Miming putting something on. The actor was going under their chair, picking up something invisible, miming putting it on their head, and then going downstage. And so at the time, I said to the team, where, like, that's obviously a crown, right? And he's Prince Charming, he's putting on his crown. Where's the crown? And an answer I got back was, well, they didn't give me anything. You know, the royal they. So I said, I actually happened to have a student at the time visiting rehearsal, and I turned and I said, make him a crown. And they took some gaff tape and some cardboard, and it looked like a, you know, kind of like a Burger King version of a crown, but it was something. And I said, why don't you go up to the actor and give it to them? And the actor was like, you were paying attention to me? Like, that's like amazing. They were just so taken aback that we were trying to support their process by giving them something to actually pick up and put on their head rather than making them mime it. And it just it really does, when you have a tangible, tactile, visceral thing to work with instead of miming, it makes such a difference to their process.
Certainly, whenever you can, work with the prop master to see what rehearsal props they can get you before we ever start rehearsals. Try to have them in time for the first blocking rehearsal. There's always prop that gets added at the last minute, cigarettes, especially pens, those kind of pens and letters. Those are pretty easy for stage management to come up with a doofer, at least for the beginning. But I, like Claudia said, that sometimes she annoys her students with how much she brings in, but she brings her recycling into the theater to cut up the cardboard and the plastic and stuff like that. And I think that's a nice, fun idea and another way to keep reusing things and not have to have, and of course we know that they're a last minute, you know, this is not going to become the final thing usually. It's always fun as a stage manager, whether your prop gets, you know, kept for the finale, or finally you're also like, hey, we're still using my scribbling on paper. Should we do a real paper prop here? But you can make just about anything quickly to doofer the scene with the paper you've got, the Kleenex, the spike tape, bits of tie line you grabbed from the previous tech, those kind of things.
Paper plates, coffee cups, plastic knives and spoons. I think that one of the things that stage managers will also talk about is what rehearsal props have you made, and then what props have made it into the show. And I have done actually a number of shows where the prop I made in rehearsal was actually what ended up being the performance prop. I mean, not too often, and it has to obviously be things that can be made out of cardboard, but you really, in a proscenium house, you don't really need anything. If you're doing a 1920s or anything earlier, I should be a dramaturg here. I don't know when filters were added to cigarettes, but if you're doing a show that is prior to filters being added to cigarettes, then you never really need anything other than a index card cut in half and rolled up into a little cigarette, and it looks great as long as you're in a proscenium house.
Trying to figure out for our folks on the line how much we want to go over the rest of this PowerPoint slide.
Well, any questions?
Same things.
Do we have any questions, Adrian?
I don't have any questions from our chat group. Are there any questions from the folks on the phones that I haven't been able to hear from yet? Any phone questions from folks?
Somebody just unmuted, it looks like.
Hearing none, I think I think we continue to move forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to go back a little to the beginning of our conversation, that we said, how do you talk about what is stage management and what are stage managers and what do stage managers do, and can you talk about the essence of things versus what we do? And I think any conversation that happens in stage manager land really is falls back into what do you do as a stage manager, and that seems to be, you can't really define what stage managing is without talking about what we do. But I do think that ultimately you can talk about what we do, and it all traces back to we help tell the story, and anything we're doing should be focused on telling the story. And when you're in a performance process, your job, that's what maintaining the artistic integrity of the show is. It's telling the story the way that the creative team set the storytelling, and making decisions on how to tell the story when things go wrong. So, and things are going to go wrong because it's live theater. And especially the more advanced, the more high tech, the more automation you have in a show, the more likely things are going to go wrong. And you will often, as a stage manager, be in a position to make decisions of how to tell the story, and how to tell the story as close as possible while maintaining the artistic integrity of the show, and keep the storytelling going. And so that's where, way back, I always say they maintain the artistic integrity of the show for the director, for the creative team, and they maintain the artistic integrity of the show for the producer. And I will say that in my experience, sometimes that's different. And you have to, as a stage manager, your goal is to be able to balance both, with the understanding that, well, your job is to work with and collaborate with, and you want to maintain the artistic integrity that came from the creative team, but ultimately you're hired by the producer. And the difference, where it goes different to me, is often where, I think that the line in the sand of where you cancel a show or you stop a show and you don't, because the story isn't being told the way that artistic team left it is different for the creative team than it is for the producer. And sometimes as a stage manager, you are making decisions on how to tell the story and keep the story going, where if it was left to the creative team, they would say, this is too far away. We have to stop telling the story because it's not the way we said it. And sometimes the producer's line is a little farther along and says, no, there's no canceling the show. You can still tell the story, make it work as close as possible. And one of the stories I tell is that I worked with a I worked with a director once who expressed concern about somebody understudying a role, and said that yes, they might be the second or the third cover for that role, but I don't really see that artistically. I'm not really comfortable with that. I don't really want them to go on stage in that role. And the answer that I gave was, okay, I won't tell you. I will tell you not to come to the theater on that day if I need to. I absolutely know that maintaining artistic integrity means that that will be the last choice to cover that role. But the producer has determined that that person, that's how they're covering the show. And it may not be the best artistic choice, but it may happen someday. And so I just will tell you not to come to the theater so you don't have to witness it. And I will do my best, you know? So sometimes you have to say that. I don't, you know, sometimes the creative team would say, no, if that automation piece breaks, or if that part of that something goes wrong in the show, then you have to stop it and you have to not tell the story. That's a cancellation. Well, the producer will sometimes say, nope, that's not cancellation yet. And a good producer will obviously wants to also maintain the artistic integrity, because otherwise why did they hired the creative team to do it. They had their hand on how the story was set and told from the beginning. So I'm not saying that producers will throw out the artistic integrity at all. I just saying that they're often just a little more comfortable to go a little farther, maybe.
And it's also things like if your set stops working, when it comes right down to it, we tell stories. So can you tell the story without the set? How far does it deviate? I mean, audience members will tell you when they were at that show where all the lights went out and they still watched the whole show by flashlight and they felt so safe, and they were 10 minutes from the end anyway and they wanted to know how it ended. The shows that go wrong are often some of the best ones. And so how can you continue to communicate the story safely, the whole safety discussion we've been having too, but
right.
Also, and you don't have to be the sole person making the decisions. Use your team around you, because certainly I've had, you know, things get caught up in the fly rail, and I've asked, does this, because I know enough of what all of our set pieces are, even though I'm not exactly what balance they're in with the weight system and all that kind of stuff, but does this still work? You know, can the blackout drop still come in? Yes. Okay, well, that gives us 29 more seconds to fill if we can bring that in. Is this person still safe who's up in the grid? Yes. Great. Does anybody else see a reason we can't go on? And use your team. You don't have to be the only one making decisions. And if it's a safety factor, you shouldn't be the only one making decisions. But what can you do to keep the show going if need be? Or at what point does it become a thing that it is safe and we do need to stop?
And some of the examples recently have been like when Groundhog Day was, I think it was their first preview. It was one of their early previews, and their turntable stopped working. Well, they said to the audience, we're going to go along on this journey with you. We're going to tell you the story, but our set is not working. We're not going to be able to tell you the story the way we planned. And they basically gave a concert version. And the other story from recently is when the Lion King on Broadway flooded after the blackout in New York, and there was a huge amount of damage to some of the puppets and some of the costumes. And the decisions were made based on, can we still tell this story? And if we can't, that's where audience usually love it when you go to them and say, hey folks, come along with us on this journey. We're going to have to change the way we planned to tell you the story, but we still want to tell it to you, and we're gonna be real, and we're gonna be honest, and we're gonna be vulnerable, and we're gonna tell you this is how we're gonna go along on the storytelling today. Come with us on this journey.
Just because the turntable breaks doesn't mean the turntable won't still spin. So I've done a show where we told the audience what was going on, and then all of the crew sat around the edge of the stage and hand turned it, you know, doing the little hamster wheel, and then hand held it because it also meant the brakes were no longer working. And it was like, no, NOH drama. So you don't see the people in black. And ultimately the crew got a standing ovation at the end because the audience loved it. They went along for the journey, just like she was saying.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Do you have anything you want to make sure you cover in this section before we open up to some questions?
No, let's talk about questions.
So, and Adrian, anything that's coming up in the background there, or does anybody have any
Right.
questions?
I'm going to open it up to any phone folks first. Folks on phones, don't forget to unmute before you raise your virtual hand.
And I will put this in. I'm looking for not just questions, but like, because on our calls and on the webinar right now are other stage managers, but this may be listened to or watched by a variety of people. I would love to know whether you have a comment or a question on some of the things we've talked about.
Ellen Marie, I think you had something.
About what?
Oh, I thought I heard your voice coming through.
Well, we have a question.
I thought I can't. I was curious, actually curious about how we, if we're in this situation that we're not responsible, how do we get situations like Spider-Man? I mean, how do we think, have you ever thought about breaking that down as to how that happened? And the reason I'm thinking about that is because I'm thinking about what Barbara Donner said at our banquet about feeling responsible because she observed things that were happening in a rehearsal that weren't happening to her, but she felt like she wondered out loud if she maybe should have stepped in those situations. And I wonder how we deal with responsibility when we're thinking about those situations.
In terms of when things.
Well, you're in the room.
Is that what you mean?
You're in the room. Placido's in the room. Somebody's being harassed, and there isn't anybody else there.
Well, that's why it goes back to the job is communication.
Right. I know your communication, but nobody communicated that was happening to the producers, supposedly. So was it the stage manager's responsibility to communicate that? I mean, I think I think that's where people get into the holes happen. Does that make sense? Because there's a reluctance to characterize somebody as doing something if you're not the one the person's doing it to, but yet the stage manager is observing.
I'm not sure following, because I think that everyone in the room, of any room, every adult in a situation, if you see someone else being harassed, has the responsibility to say something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And you did mention that earlier. So let's say something happens in the room and an actor goes to the producer, and then the director goes to the producer and the stage manager, and they all say different things.
What are you asking? What is the stage manager?
I'm just musing about because to me, I like to dig into the deep questions. And as a stage manager, sometimes I wonder if I should be doing something more than what I'm doing, which is observing and
Yeah.
So you're breaking up a little bit, but also it goes back to just, it's really breaking up now. How much, it shouldn't necessarily be just the stage manager's job. It really should be everybody's. And sometimes it does fall into other people thinking.
Really, in that moment, hurt. whether it be that their hand is holding.
So I'm going to mute Ellen Marie for just a moment here while we deal with whatever this distortion thing is, and can let Erin continue to potentially respond. Ellen Marie, I will check in with you on a sideline to make sure that your connection is okay. And we do have a question from Michael Morales once you've responded to this, Erin.
Well, I think I was finishing. It's like, yeah, everybody should have the, it really should fall on anybody in the room. A lot of people think it should only fall to the stage managers, and I honestly don't think that's fair. Some of the whole Me Too and the harassment, sometimes it was also happening exactly to the stage manager. So we need, going on to what we were gonna talk about towards the end of this, the advocacy and community feeling for stage managers too. Stand up for your stage managers as well. Don't put everything just on the stage manager if you see something happening too. And as far as her thing about, you know, the actor saw one thing, the director saw one thing, and the stage manager saw one thing, we're still not the arbiter in the room. All three can present the same valid responses of what they saw to the producer. It's the producer's job to figure out what actually happened and if they need to get more arbitration involved and that kind of stuff. But it's not just that the stage manager has the knowing eyes for everything, because maybe they didn't see it all or they only saw one side of it. So putting it just on the stage manager, personally, I don't think is fair.
And if you're talking about an equity situation, my understanding, and I would always let equity speak for itself, and so call your rep is always the appropriate response to would equity or what would their response be. But I don't believe that equity would ever go to a stage manager and say, why didn't you handle this? This was your responsibility. I think they would go to a stage manager and say, tell us your, like, what information you have so we can help this process.
I think ready to move on to Michael's question.
Yes. Michael Morales.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Claudia. Hi. No, I didn't really have a question, and actually, you guys sort of took the words out of my mouth. I just wanted to say that it's so tough for young stage managers to not feel like they have to take care of absolutely everything and provide absolutely everything. You talked about the safety. I'm sort of hearing the theme of this whole thing is to just know that you have a team around you, whether in production, that's the crew, whether in rehearsal, that's the producers. You know, you just have to know you're the facilitator, you're the communicator, and to use the people around you to take care of situations that may arise. You know, in extreme circumstances, the harassment just came up. If I observe something like that, I like to, hey, let's call a break. Get out of the situation and then phone your producer, pull your director aside, use the team around you to figure out a way to move forward. And yeah, I mean, that's all I was going to say was it's tough to, as stage managers, our personalities are, we want to take care of everybody all the time. So just be confident that in your team around you and use them.
That's a really good point, Michael, and you said it really well, and that there's a tendency when you're first starting out as a stage manager and to think that you have to be all and end all. You have to be good at everything. You have to be in control of everything. You have to be in control. I mean, that's you're never in control, but you feel like there's so much responsibility that it can cause stage managers to not realize that sometimes the job is to say, that's something that I have, like, that's above my pay grade. That's something I have to pass on. It's not something that I should be handling. It's something other than I am the one to make sure that the right people hear what's going on and address it.
And I can add on that if you'd like.
Yes, please, Bobby.
Yeah, so in fact, a good story for that is actually we recently found out at UCF here that we couldn't purchase, our budget cannot purchase ibuprofen or Tylenol, Advil, certain first aid products. And I know when we first found that out, a lot of the stage managers were like, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We can't provide these supplies in the rehearsal room anymore." And then as we talked through this, we kind of, we used our SM instinct to realize that, just recently UCF had put first aid kits in every single building on campus. And we realized that was actually a remedy for this problem, and that we don't have to worry about providing this, or, some people thought we had to provide, go buy these out of our personal budgets, and that's absolutely not the case. But part of the communication and instinct is, so the complaint was that, well, these kits sometimes run out, and they're maintained by the University Environmental Health and Safety Department. And so part of our communication is, well, there's a phone number on the front of that. So, part of that, passing that up the line, is calling that phone number and saying, this kit is out and we need to get this replenished. And, that I think is going to be an effective way for us to deal with this.
And that is a lovely segue to something that I wanted to also talk about, which is that there is this myth that stage managers must have this awesome Mary Poppins type kit that has everything in it, and that they also spent their own money on this kit and will freely give out all of the items to anybody who asks. And I fell into that same myth when I was in college. I had awesome kits and all sorts of stuff. I now carry what I need for me, and I hope that the company has all of those things provided, and you make do with what the company has provided. You may ask for petty cash for some of those things, but please do not think that you have to provide every Band-Aid, every cough drop, every pair of scissors, all of that stuff. You might take the small pair of scissors so that you have it for yourself. I always take a baby stapler so I don't have to find theirs, but I'll replenish it with their staplers. But please, if you are a producer listening to this, please work with your stage manager for what should be in your company's stage management kit. And if you are a stage manager who comes into that situation, do your best to see if you can get reimbursed or have a rental fee for all of those things, because it really is a lot of money, and we're not making that much as it is anyway. So I really want to get that point across. Now I'm going to step down off of that soapbox.
I also, sorry, Claudia, I'd like to also just add that there are reporting structures, whether it's from the first aid box, right? Or whether it's what the process is in your building, right? Whether the hotel has institutional processes, or the theater that you're working at, or if your union has reporting structures. And those are going to go across the board. Yes, there's a certain amount of responsibility that stage managers will place upon themselves, but we are not the only people in any given room that have an opportunity to report something that might be going wrong. And whether that's a health and safety, or in a physical sense, or whether that's health and safety in an emotional, mental, verbal abuse type of sense, that there's structures there. The union has, Equity now has an anonymous reporting system for things like that. But I don't see that as falling directly on only the stage manager in the room, because it cannot fall on one person, right? The safety of the group is the responsibility of the group as much as it is for one person to be the eyes. So just throwing that out there as well. Yes, there are things in place, but we are a group endeavor, right? We are a team process. And while we can be a team lead and a team wrangler and a team player, everybody needs to be part of that group.
Absolutely. What I like to, going back to what is stage management, or what is, and then is there a definition for our job? What I like to say is that it's not my responsibility to handle everything, but I might have the expertise to help facilitate the communication and help make sure that the people who are supposed to handle an issue know about it and have the information to handle it. It is not my responsibility to provide my own a stage management kit they are hiring me because I have the expertise to be able to say to a producer to think ahead and say, here's what I think we need supply-wise in order to make this rehearsal process work, or in order to make this performance process work. And to have the ability to say, here's what I think is needed, and then be able to work out what is in the budget and how can you get along. And so you would also decide what is needed based on, here's the essentials, here's what is absolutely needed, and here is what would help the process, and figure out what budget you're working with. So really, I'm not being hired as a stage manager to provide a product. I'm being hired as a stage manager for the skill set to facilitate the product.
So we're about time to wrap it up here. Megan, I've seen you popping in and out. Do you have a question or comment you'd like to add? No? Okay. Anyone else have anything else that they'd like to add or talk about before we wrap it up?
Well, I could just say something that Claudia actually talked to us recently in another one of our form classes, is that, you know, stage managers, we don't deal with the budget directly, but we are supposed to manage resources wisely within that budget. So, and I kind of equated that to like how a designer doesn't deal with the budget, the numbers directly. That would be the, you know, the production manager and whatnot, but they still are expected to work within that the same way that we would be with copies or with office supplies or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yep, great. And then I think the final thing, just to go back, so January's topic for Year of the Stage Manager was what is stage manager? February is more about advocacy and community building. So there are many places online for stage managers themselves to discuss. There is a general stage managers Facebook group. There's smnetwork.org as a website. There's this Year of the Stage Manager group that is not just for stage managers. We hope that producers are in there and admins and stuff. So there's some lovely threads in there about how can a director help with the process. What do we wish directors knew or would take advantage of for having us in the room? Which some of it is like, let us in, where we ultimately can be one of your best collaborators if you let us work with you, rather than thinking of us as the equity police or non-equity police or whatever is the situation. If you're in marketing or an admin, we often love to share our view of backstage. You know, you interview actors, you interview directors. Interview the stage manager or give us a shout out one day on Facebook. Or certainly if you're at all able to put bios for the designers, add a bio for us if it's not already required in your contract. Think about us taking over the Instagram takeover day. Things like that. I had a show there. I was calling from the back of the house, and I asked the photographer if he could turn around and get any couple photos of me while I was wandering the aisles, and he said absolutely. So I have some beautiful photos that I never would have gotten if I hadn't taken the chance to ask him. But and include us in thank you cards. Or also, if you're hanging out after a show and getting ready to go have some pizza or a drink, invite us along. We may not have actually heard about it, especially if we're the one up in the booth away from everybody else. We love the sense of community just like you guys all do, so include us. I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that to me, that's an interesting rabbit hole to go down, to say, like, this is what we want from people. There's something about that I'm not sure I can articulate. But what I think it really is that I love talking about stage managing. I think that advocacy for stage management is not about, here, this is what we want to ask for. I think to me it's more about, here, let's make sure you understand what we do and how we're approaching the process, and so that we can understand what is needed and how to best support the process. So I think that ultimately the my favorite thing about this year of the stage manager is the fact that we are talking about stage managing constantly. One of the best things that ever happened to me in my life is that I switched to being a full-time stage manager to being paid to talk about stage managing in a room full of students every day, because that's what I have transitioned into, is I get to talk about the why and the nuances of and the love of what we do. And so I could just keep going on, but I won't, because we have to wrap this up.
Adrian, do you have anything you want to add?
Just that what we each do for each show is tailored for each show, no matter which segment of the industry we're in. And that includes the teams we're working with and the processes that we use to communicate, maintain, and work within the structure of the show. So I think that it's important to look at the big picture and then in your process narrow down what's going to be viable for you as a team, depending on what your team is and what's going to be needed for the show. That's my takeaway. I do a lot of developing theater and things that are in various different scales. And it's important to understand what's manageable and what isn't. And I think that's part of the job of managing, is to look at the big picture and then tailor it as much as possible. So I think this overview is really helpful in that it then gives the option of asking that bigger question for your individual show.
Yeah. The other thing I will say is that, you know, we could say that I hope that there are people who watch this webinar outside of stage management, because we love it so much. We want to share. We are the people who are like, no, have some of this treat.
Yes.
I want you to love it as much as I do. Have some of this stage management treat. But I'm not sure other people are going to watch this. The truth is, I think it's perfectly, the conversation is always going to be more active among stage managers to stage managers. And so I'm excited to have talked at and with all of you who are on the webinar and on the call today, because you all are stage managers, and I hope that the more we talk to each other, then maybe the more we could also be talking to everyone else and bringing them along on this awfully great adventure.
I think that's a lovely way to sum it all up. And on that, I think we are at time. So thank you everybody online. Thank you everybody on the phone. And certainly thank you, Claudia and Adrian, for co-hosting all of this with me. And look forward to talking to more people online again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Bye.